Start the recording. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all here today. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar titled "Leveraging Artificial Intelligence to Create a Classroom to Support All Learners." First, I would like to start off by recognizing our very generous sponsors. First is LearnX, our bronze sponsor. LearnX is a free Google Chrome extension that allows students to document their research journey. I'm sorry, letting people in at the same time, so please excuse me. As students research, LearnX captures their searches, their sites visited, the time on the sites, and notes the websites, which can then be exported into an organized notes page, an auto-generated bibliography, and a snapshot report summarizing their journey. You can learn more about them by going to learnix.com. That's LEARNICS.com. And let me explain. I'd also like to recognize NEDLA's friend sponsor, that is Rod's Pulse podcast. In his podcast, Dr. Murray explores topics related to e-learning technologies. You can find his podcast at rodspulsepodcast.com. NEDLA is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting digital learning for all. If you're interested in becoming a member or a sponsor, please feel free to email us at douglas.koch, it's K-O-C-H, at nedla.org. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Katie Nieves Liquinco. Katie?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today, or if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching in advance. I'm really excited to talk today about how we can use AI and different AI tools to create classrooms that are supportive and inclusive for all students and their learning needs. Just to give you a quick background about me, just so you know who I am the teacher coordinator for educational technology integration for a school district in New Jersey. Big title that basically means that I do PD for technology for 15 schools. I was previously a middle school special education teacher, so accessibility and inclusion are really close to my heart and really important to me, and that's something I like to continue to present and talk about. I have my doctorate in EdTech leadership. I am the founder of Assembly Inclusion, which is a e-learning platform and a podcast about disability inclusion and accessibility, and I am a Google innovator and trainer. And that's my contact info in case you ever want to get in touch with me. Okay, so our goals for today's session is we are going to first discuss what UDL is, the Universal Design for Learning Framework, and the integration between that framework and AI very quickly. Really, the bulk of the presentation today is going to focus on different strategies and prompts that you can use within different AI systems to create inspiration and ideas for how you can better support your learners. And then we'll wrap up by discussing the implications of using AI and how to really bring those ideas into your classroom. If at any point in time during my presentation today, you have any questions, feel free to unmute and say them out loud and interrupt me, or you can always put them in the chat too. That works as well. I'm not as good about checking the chat, otherwise I get really distracted, but I will try my best to. Okay, so I wanted to start off by talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages of using AI for inclusion. With all discussions about AI, it's important to discuss what some of the pros and cons are. I know it is a very, I want to say, controversial topic, but it can be depending on the context. So first, I just want to talk about some of the advantages with regard to using AI for inclusion specifically. So AI can help promote accessibility in a lot of different ways. There are tools that will do live captioning for people. So people who are deaf and hard of hearing have immediate access to captioning on demand. And that's just one example, but there are a lot of examples of different accessibility tools and features that capitalize on AI and use it to support people in the classroom or in daily life. In addition, a lot of assistive technologies use artificial intelligence or machine learning in some way to better personalize the experience for the individual user, thus making it easier for them to use the technology in their day-to-day life. personalization. You can personalize learning with AI, and just the speed of how you can access information. That's always an advantage. I always like to address the concerns of AI because not everything is perfect. Not every AI tool is perfect. So it's important to consider some of the disadvantages as well if you're going to start to bring it into your instructional design for your classroom. The obvious one being that there is the potential for bias or discrimination with the results depending on where that data is coming from. I always like to familiarize myself with where is the information coming from the AI. Is it just a general wide search online? Is it from a specific pool of information? It's really good to know before you use a tool where that information is coming from. AI can be, in some cases, technically complex. I feel like that's happening less and less now. Things are becoming a lot more user friendly. There's always data and privacy concerns. Where is that information going? I always like to make sure I know that as well. I always try to preface my presentation by saying, obviously, don't put student data into tools like ChatGPT or Google Bard or whatever you're using. If you're going to use AI, just be aware of privacy and data issues. And then obviously the biggest one is accuracy, making sure that, as always, we're all educators. We know making sure anything that you find on AI or that is generated using AI is accurate. So before we dive into the strategies, I wanted to briefly review the UDL framework because each of the strategies that I suggest is one of the recommendations from the UDL framework. And so just in case you're either unfamiliar with it or you just want a quick refresher, the UDL framework has 3 pillars that you can use to better support your students in the classroom. So as opposed to differentiation or individualization of instruction, this is something that you can do when you design your classroom experience or your lessons or your activities or your assessments before your students actually need the support. So it's making sure those supports are automatically embedded into your learning as opposed to being an afterthought. So the first pillar is multiple means of representation. So finding different ways to present information to your students, not just giving them a straight lecture, but giving them options. That might look like offering multiple mediums of information, giving students an opportunity to choose how they access the information: video, podcast, infographic, presentation, lecture-based notes, etc. Offering various perspectives and experiences, clearly organizing information, highlighting key concepts within a larger, body of work, and providing vocab support. There's also multiple means of engagement, which is making sure that students are motivated to learn by incorporating their interests or their personal motivations. So how you can do that is by connecting learning to student experiences that they've had, being flexible in how you pace lessons, allowing students to self-pace through things in some cases, offering different levels of support or scaffolding, allowing them to collaborate, building in authentic assignments and activities and tasks, giving them choice, and then integrating technology. And the last pillar is multiple means of action and expression, which is giving students different ways to show that they have mastered a concept or a skill. So that could look like, giving them choices, so choice board activities to show their learning, not giving them one set specific assignment, or in the case of if you have to give them that one set specific assignment, having a secondary assignment where they do have that choice, having self-assessments and reflections for students to reflect on their learning and their experiences, varying your feedback, and giving opportunities for revision. That's just the 3 pillars. You will see these ideas and these suggestions pop up in each of the strategies that I cover. Each of the strategies connects in some way to either representation, engagement, or action and expression. Okay. Before we dive into the strategies, these are just some of the AI tools that are currently very popular in education. We're really going to focus on specifically how you can put a prompt and specific prompts you can use into an AI system. Like I use ChatGPT and Google Bard probably the most frequently, so I'm going to do those a lot to get ideas and inspiration for how to support your students. But there are a lot of tools out there that go beyond just giving you information and will actually build things for you. I know Magic School is becoming increasingly popular. Grammarly has its own AI built in now. Diffit we'll talk a little bit about with how that can differentiate level text on demand. Adobe has Firefly, which is an image generator. Canva, which I know a lot of educators are using because of the free educator licenses, allows you to build, design templates on demand based on things you're interested in. And fun fact, this background and template is from Canva. I had them design the background for me. So just to, I figured that'd be fun. CurryPod, there's a bunch. Google Labs, they have their own built-in AI software into things like Docs and Slides and Gmail now. I literally can go into Gmail and say, write me an email to a parent about an issue that happened in class today, and it will draft it out for me in Gmail, and I can just edit it. But we're really going to focus today on Bard and ChatGPT, but you can really use these prompts with any AI system that you are interested in. Those are just the two main ones that I really want to focus on. Okay. So before we get started on the strategies, this is just an organizational tip I recommend to everybody for getting started. I use these two, ChatGPT and Bard, a lot. And when I find a prompt that works for me that I know I'm going to be using frequently, I save it as a thread and I just keep asking questions, the same prompt over and over within that thread. It just makes it easier to remember later on, like, oh, I had a really good thread going about how to create, authentic assessments for my students. And I want to do that again, but what did I do? I can go back to my thread and find it out. These are just my two examples for my podcast that I run, that I go back to all the time. Just a, quick tip. Okay. And I did want to touch upon too, even though this is going to be more of a session that focuses specifically on how we can put in prompts. I did want to show you that, Google Bard specifically, it is an experiment technically. I did want to talk about some of the things they have built in. Like they have the accessibility features to automatically read things aloud. They show you the other drafts that they have. You can find content online that agrees with and disagrees with statements that it's generated, which is pretty interesting. You can simplify or make longer your responses, just show you some of the things that exist within Bard. But the bulk of this presentation is really going to be how can we put in different prompts to get strategies and ideas for supporting our students. And I really like to think of this session as, how can you get ideas and inspiration for how to better support your students. I'm very particular about things that are designed for my classroom. So for me, a lot of times, like the tools that are AI based that design things for you, I get very frustrated because it's not the way I want it to look specifically. But this type of, putting in a prompt and getting ideas and then building it out myself really appeals to me. So that's really what I wanted to focus on today. Okay. So the first strategy I wanted to talk about is creating materials with varied levels of supports. So this falls within the UDL framework of adjusting content or process within a lesson to give students different opportunities and ways to tackle a skill. So instead of saying, everybody's going to focus on this one skill and we're going to do it in this one way with this one activity, you can go into an AI system like ChatGPT or Bard and find different activities for students that focus on that same skill. So in this example, I was asking for 3 different approaches to teach connotation and denotation to 6th graders. And what Bard did in this example was it broke down 3 different activities that I could then create and give to my students that focus on connotation and denotation. And then students could choose, oh, this one, this lesson, the media analysis one really appeals to me. I'm going to do that. Or, the sensory explanation appeals to me. I'm going to work on that. But for me as the teacher, I don't have to sit there then and say, okay, what are 3 different approaches and pathways that my students could take to practice this skill? It created it out for me. This is another example of it with ChatGPT. It had 3 different approaches that you could then go in and create that focus on and teach the skill or practice the skill or reinforce the skill of connotation and denotation. It gives you a little explanation of what the activity could look like. And then now I'm free as a teacher to go in and design it. Now, if you're interested, you really could go into a platform like Magic School AI or something like that, or CurryPod, and automatically create an activity for you. Or you could go and just take the inspiration and go build it out yourself. I really like using AI tools as well to find authentic and alternative assessment ideas. I feel like that's something that sometimes I would struggle with in the classroom. How can I take the skill that we're learning, the standard we're working on, and make it authentic to the students' experiences? I don't want them to just say, oh, I'm writing an essay just to write an essay. I wanted the assessments to be meaningful and authentic to what the material was. So in this example, I asked, this is Bard, to tell me how I could teach students or connect the concept of wavelength and frequency in science to real life. What are some real life applications of this skill? And what it did for me is it broke down different ways that this scale of wavelengths, frequency, amplitude could be connected to real life. So as the teacher now, I can look and say, oh, okay, we could have the students do something with x-rays or MRIs, and medical imaging. Maybe that's something that appeals to them. And it's a real life, authentic thing that they can, tangibly understand, because it's, more than just the concept. It's something that connects to their real life scenario. It's also a good opportunity for project-based learning, because you can build in, take this inspiration of real life applications that the AI system gave you, and then you can, design an activity or a assessment that is more authentic and builds in that real life understanding and real life scenario. Same example, this is from ChatGPT. This is their response. What they did was they broke it down. Here are some ways that this connects to real life or exists in the real world. Here's the application of it. Here's the explanation of it. So as the teacher, I can look and say, okay, I want my students to do an end of unit summative, but I really want to make sure that it's connected to real life. Here are some ideas that I could use to build out my assessment. Okay. I really like that AI systems can easily break down skills too, and abstract skills specifically. When I was teaching special education, that was something my students struggled with, was a lot of time those abstract skills that weren't tangible. And sometimes, you know the skills so well, but you really want to figure out, how can I break this down in a way that makes sense so that my students can really work up toward the more abstract skill. So the first skill I thought of was theme. If you're teaching theme to like fifth graders, that's an abstract concept. It doesn't exist in the text, doesn't explicitly say it. How can I teach this to students? So what I did was, in the AI system in ChatGPT and Bard, I put in, how can I break down the skill of theme to fifth graders? And you can put the exact grade level for your students. It recognizes that, which is great. So what's nice about this is, not only does it offer recommendations for how you can teach the skill or scaffold the skill, it also gives you different approaches that you could take for students who may not be grasping the material. So you can look at this and easily say, okay, my students are just not getting it. I don't know where to start. How do I help them? How do I break this down even further? I go to, an AI system to figure that out. It's, starts with simple things like giving a definition, giving them examples, and it really shows you how you can take a skill and break it down to better help your students. This is the example from ChatGPT. They went in a little bit more detail. I like to vary between both of them, or if there's another one that you prefer to use as well. I alternate most of the time between ChatGPT and Bard, just because I like to see the difference between the responses. Sometimes one is longer or more detailed than the other, or one gives me more of what I need. But you could literally just plug in a standard and say, how can I break this down for my students? I like to use the phrasing broken into manageable chunks, just because it was so often, IEPs use language like that. So it was helpful. And it really kind of gives me a step-by-step, like I can go all the way back to this level and start here and then work my students who are struggling up through the assignment. If you have a standard or skill that's usually challenging for your students, you could do this in advance and then build your lesson around that, building them up until they reach, the more complicated level of the skill. Okay. Any questions or anything so far? I'm just going to keep going through strategies and things like that. But if you have any questions, feel free to, pause and ask them. All right. So one of the things that I struggled with sometimes, and I think a lot of teachers struggles with, is how do you connect a skill to a student's personal interest, especially with a student who maybe is not engaged in the material and not interested in it, but they have definitive interests. How do you make that bridge between some of these more abstract scientific math concepts, language arts concepts, and what they're interested in? So what I did here is I thought about math, and I thought about, we're learning rational and irrational numbers. And I put in the prompt, how can I teach what are some approaches or connections between rational and irrational numbers, my skill, and football? I have a student who loves football. What is the connection between the two? And what Bard and ChatGPT can do is it will show you examples of how these two things are connected. So it talks about, football measurements. It talks about the trajectory of a football so that you can start to see, okay, this is a clear connection between the skill and my student's interest. My student isn't engaged in class. They don't really care about this topic. Let me try to build in a question that involves the connection between football and this math skill to get them more engaged. Or, maybe I can give them an activity to research, the connection between football measurements and irrational numbers. Obviously, I didn't check this one as much because math is not really my thing, but I wanted to give different examples. But it's a great way for incorporating choice, incorporating student interests, figuring out how you can create individual activities that appeal to student interests. This is the ChatGPT response to that. They talk about statistics and player statistics. They talk about measurements. They give you specific scenarios and example problems that you could bring into students that connect the idea of rational and irrational numbers in football. But you could do this with any skill across any subject. Ask your AI system to identify the connection between the skill and the student interest, because that's key to engagement anyway, and that's a key part of the UDL framework, especially within the engagement pillar. So this is an easy way to bridge the connection, especially if it's an interest that you're not that familiar with. One of the things I really like about AI systems is the ability to, I had mentioned at the beginning, the speed in which you can get responses and get things done. So I had worked in the co-taught classroom for science, for social studies, for language arts pretty frequently when I was teaching. So one of the things that I was often tasked with was taking an article and simplifying it or scaffolding it so that my students could understand it. And there was a lot of tier 3 vocabulary, and the sentence structure was complex. And it was difficult. And if you walk into a classroom and you just get the article right then and there, it's pretty difficult to simplify it on the fly. So what you can do with ChatGPT, with Bard, and with another tool I'm going to show you, Diffit, you can take the URL of a text or just copy and paste text if you don't have the URL to it. And you can ask the AI system to simplify or make more difficult, make more challenging if you want to extend, challenge your students. Take the article and, change it, basically. Keep the structure and the information consistent, but make it more difficult or simpler depending on the needs of the student. You can actually ask for a specific grade level as well. So in this example, I said, take this article, and I gave the URL, and I said, make it at, I think it's at a 4th grade level. So what it did for me is it took the article and it gave me a new version of it. Now I've read the article, so I can, verify to make sure all the information is accurate. And I can give that same article to a student. So there are a lot of platforms that have that adaptability built in already. But if you're finding, new current events articles or things on the web that you want to use, maybe you don't have that option, this is a good way to get around that. So if a student is really struggling, maybe you gave them a text and you see them struggling and you want to give them a simplified version that still, teaches them the same content, you can just plug that link in and request it on your AI system. This is the Google Bard version. The other one was the ChatGPT version. What I like about the Bard version is that you can see here at the bottom, they put in additional details that they added to the article. So the rest of it is the same content, but for clarification, they, added in additional information that might help a student further. So they said, like, I explained what a seismometer is and how it's used to study the Earth's interior, which you would need to know if you didn't know what that was. Maybe the article didn't originally define that. So now that definition is in there for the students. Yes, I see a hand up. So do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. How do you validate that the information you're getting is correct? Because that is one of the limitations of these systems. They sometimes hallucinate and drift. So what do you do for validation?
So in this particular circumstance, the information is coming from an article that I already gave them. So in that circumstance, I've already read the article and I know the information. So I would just go through and, reread the article that they provided and make sure that they didn't add anything that isn't true. Or, rearrange any of the sentences so that they're no longer accurate. So that's just me manually going in as the teacher and making sure.
How would you do it if that weren't the case? If you didn't know the information?
It's the same way I would verify anything else that I, find online. I would check if there was, in most cases, when you're giving the students, a text or you're asking it to write a text, you kind of generally have an understanding of the topic in some capacity. But if there was something that I didn't know, like for example, like the last example that I gave, where I asked for the connection between a student interest and a skill, maybe I don't have an understanding or background knowledge of that concept. The same way I would, verify the accuracy of other things that I've read online, I would have to just quickly go out and do a search for it. Bard does have within it the opportunity to run a search based on the information that they've provided. So you could click on it and see, it highlights it in green if there's multiple sources on the web that match that same information. So you can click on it and see where that information came from. Or I would just do a search for it and see if I could find a verified source that would offer me that same information that they gave. All right. Any other questions before I keep going? Okay. All right. There is another tool that does this for you. I just wanted to talk about it. It's called Diffit. It does the same thing as what I had just mentioned with ChatGPT and Bard, where I just plugged in the URL and asked it to break down or raise the level of a text that exists. So in this case, I plugged in the URL. I asked it to make it approximately fourth grade. Because the current article was actually, I think, documented at I want to say a 9th or 10th grade reading level. And the same thing, it will do it for you. And just in the same way that you would go through with ChatGPT and Bard, you would read through it and make sure that the information that they gave is accurate. In a lot of cases, especially when you give them an article, they're usually just rearranging the sentence structure or providing additional definitions, but always just make sure. And that is a free resource too, Diffit. I don't think you have to log in to get this information. You can just plug in the article and get a differentiated leveled text right there. Something else that I like to do, and this is more for reformatting and visualizing a text. Sometimes it helps students to see key information highlighted, to see vocab broken down, to see a visual representation of a text. Same thing. You put in a URL or you copy and paste the body of the text that you want to use, and you ask the AI system to identify key points of information, key vocab, and possibly to create a table to help break down the topic, which is great if it's like a scientific or a history-based article. It does that really well. And so this is ChatGPT's breaking down of an article. So I copy and paste the text. I said, here's what I want. Give this to me from the text. So I've read the article. I know what the article is about. And it gave me, 7 key points. So if a student is struggling because the text is longer, they know these are the key points they have to look out for or really pay attention to. The vocab that might be a little bit more challenging, the tier 3 vocab, the tier 2 vocab, it's in there. Sometimes the vocab they pick isn't the vocab I would pick, and that's when I would go in and add in, some vocab I think is challenging that maybe they missed, but it's a good starting off point. But I really like the ability of it to create on demand a table too, a table of information, and it just picks for you, what information and what it's going to put in a table. Usually it does a pretty good job, but you could give this to your students to say like, okay, here are some key ideas. Here is a table. Now, go try to tackle the text, but here's some key information that might help you out. I see a question in the chat. The recommendation for Perplexity AI. That is a good one too. Yeah, it does give the references at the end, which is appreciated, especially if you're doing an open-ended search. Do you credit ChatGPT? I do. So I am no longer in the classroom, but I do it when I work with teachers. I will say like this, was reformatted with the support of ChatGPT. The content of the article is exactly the same as, this article. And then I cite that article for my students as well. But that's who broke it down, just to show them, that I'm citing the resource that I got it from. The only thing I wanted to mention is if you do this, sometimes ChatGPT is a little finicky and it will say like, I can't read an external URL. And so in that case, you have to copy and paste a text by hand if you're trying to do this. Sometimes it works and it takes the URL. It depends on the day and how it's feeling, I guess. But I wanted to make sure I noted that. Same thing. This is what BARD looks like when you do it. It gives you the vocab, it gives you the key details, and it broke down, a table of information that was available in the text. And what's nice too is that BARD will allow you to export those tables into sheets as well. Okay. I do a lot with reading strategies because reading is so interconnected through all content areas. So I apologize that a lot of these are, they're across content areas, but they are reading strategy focused. So what I also like to do is sometimes I'll get a text and I'll want to pull out and extract some of the tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary words for my students in advance. So what you can do with ChatGPT or Google Bard or a variety of other AI tools is, again, take that article, take that URL, put it into the prompt, ask specifically for tier 3 and tier 2 vocab. I like to ask for the separation of those vocab words. Sometimes it doesn't do it correctly. Sometimes there's a word in there that I'm like, that's not really a tier 3 word, that's a tier 2 word, but I can take that and swap it out when I'm checking for accuracy. I ask for the definition, quickly go through and make sure it's defined correctly. And then I also ask for an example sentence. Sometimes the example sentences aren't great, so I'll revise the prompt to say, generate example sentences of these vocab words that include context clues in case you didn't know what the word meant. And then it gives me a better sentence. Because sometimes what it will do if you ask for a sentence, which is great to give students to help them understand the vocabulary word in context, it'll just take the sentence that the word was in, which isn't always helpful. So sometimes I will ask them to, great, now I got this information from you. My next question will be, take those sentences and give me a more detailed sentence that gives me context clues. But you can see they separated tier 2 and tier 3. Again, not perfect. There are some words that I probably would have switched, but I could do that easily once I have that information. It's just a great base to get started. This is what they pulled out from Google Bard. Google Bard had an issue with tier 2 versus tier 3, I'm going to be honest, but their example sentences were a lot better. So that's kind of why I say I like to use both, because sometimes ChatGPT is something better than Bard and vice versa, and I like to see what the difference is. But I asked specifically for a vocab list, tier 2 and tier 3 vocab, definition, and example sentence that I could help give to my students. One other thing that I like to do with texts is I always made my students self-monitoring questions, not questions they necessarily had to answer, but I would give them a question, break up paragraphs and give them a question after they finished each paragraph to just kind of reflect on it in their head. Like, can you answer this question? If you can't, go back and read the paragraph again, just to make sure you're getting the information that you need and teaching them how to stop and pause and reflect on their reading. But it's a lot of work to come up with questions for each paragraph of a text that you're giving, because not every student needs that. So you can use AI for that as well to give students that support. Same as all the other strategies, you want to verify that the questions that they're providing are questions you want your students to focus on when they're reading. Specifically, I always ask for, self-monitoring or comprehension questions from this article. I give the URL or give the text. What's nice is that Bard specifically will do recall questions first, which are great for self-monitoring because it's just recalling what was in that paragraph. Understanding questions, which are a little bit more in depth, but also then give analysis questions at the end. I like the fact that by default now it does recall, understanding, and analysis. And again, I've read the article, I know the article, so I know what questions are good for self-monitoring and what, that's not really covered in there. That's just going to confuse my students. I'm going to eliminate that question. But then what I do is I would take the text that I have and I would put these questions in I used to do it in a box underneath each paragraph. And I would say, okay, stop and reflect. Can you answer this question? No, then go back and read that paragraph again. But this is a good way to get those questions nice and easily written for you. Saves you a little bit of time then. Same here, Chat GPT, just kind of put them all in one list, the questions that could come from the text that I provided. Okay. So getting more into the personalized pathways, that's something I think is that's difficult for a lot of teachers. It's a daunting task to have to think about, okay, I want all my students to be able to write a literary analysis, to compose a lab report, to understand this skill. But I want to give, 3 or 4 or 5 different pathways to reach that end goal. Okay, so how do I think about all those different strategies? What are ways that I could do that? I like to use AI systems specifically for the inspiration for this. So I ask in the prompt, give me some pathways or varying pathways and varying mediums and activities for students to do X or to reach X. I specifically use the word pathway and I ask for a specific number of pathways. I think I said 3 in this case. So what the platform will do is it will give you an outline of ideas. Like I said, I don't use ChatGPT or Bard to plan my lessons fully. I'm very controlling about how things look and how things are presented and whether or not they fit with my students. So for me, it's just more of an idea like, oh, you know what? I didn't think about the concept of comparing and contrasting this, but it would help me my students meet this goal. You know what? I'll design a pathway that looks like that. So in this case, what it did was it gave me 3 pathways and it gave me some potential objectives, potential activities, and a potential assessment that meets the end goal that I had asked for. Again, I don't just take it at face value. It's just an idea. And I might not love all 3 pathways. I might look at pathway number 2 and say, you know what? None of my students are going to like that. Or maybe that'll be too difficult for them. Or maybe it's too easy for them. I'm just not even going to use that, which is when I'll go into the drafts and kind of see what other examples they gave. But it's a great idea to get started if you're looking for offering different pathways to reach a skill. So this is Chat GPT's. They have different learning pathways. They have different activities broken down. They don't give you like a text or anything. It's just an idea. So even if you look at it and you say, oh, you know what? I wasn't thinking about theme and multimedia, but my students could do a literary analysis in that way. That's fine. So it's just a good idea to get, it helps the ideas get, flow a little bit better. I like equate it to if you go on social media and you're looking through teacher pages and you're like, oh, that's a good idea, but I'm going to adapt it in this, and this way. That's kind of what this does for you. Okay. Well, one of the things I used to struggle with was writing passages based on interest. You can also do that with ChatGPT. In this case, I would definitely 100% make sure that it's cited. That way, your students know that that's where it came from because it's fine. Especially when I would have individualized practice for IEP goals for my students. There's only so many paragraphs you could find online that are about a student's interests and focus on the skill that they need to practice. And I want to have multiple trials. So this was a good way for me to get additional passages. I ask them usually to integrate specific vocabulary words and make sure those are included. And again, same as other activities, I would just make sure if there's information that I didn't know, I would just go through and make sure that it's verified. Same here. They give you examples of, this is a particularly long article. You can ask them to shorten it. But the prompt was write a passage about emperor penguins on a 3rd grade level that includes some 6th grade appropriate tier 2 vocab. That was the prompt I put in. It was very specific, and that's what they gave me. And it tells you at the bottom what the vocabulary words they integrated for you. All right. As we wind down, I have a couple other ones. I may not get to all of them, but I just want to make sure I touch on them briefly. Sometimes you're just looking for strategies. I still have it actually in my library. I had a big, thick red book of interventions that I used to, if I had a student who's experiencing an issue, behavioral, emotional, academic, reading, writing, whatever. And I was like, the strategies I normally give for this aren't working. What else can I do? What else can I give them? What else can I try? I used to flip through the book, and you can also obviously do a Google search, but you can also just ask, what are some ways that I can do this with my students? What are some supports that I could give? And see, in this example, they gave, examples, and not everything. Some of them you're kind of like, duh, like, yeah, pre-read the novel yourself. Like, yes, I will be doing that. Thank you. But like some things maybe you didn't think about, and it'll give you, another strategy that you can try with your students. I see a question in the chat. Do you ever flip this and ask students to use AI? I haven't personally, especially since I work more on the teacher side now, but I do encourage my teachers that I work with to have their students do this as well. It's a great way for them to practice verifying sources online too, like have them plug in an answer and see what it gives. I tried it with one of my prompts the other day, like a prompt I had given my students about a text. I was like, oh, let me see if, Chat GPT and Bard can answer it. Yeah, absolutely could not answer it. It totally made up the entire story and had no idea what was happening. So that'd be a great thing to give to students to have them verify, or to, have them explore topics further. It's, I would definitely have them try it out. Just bounce to the next one. I also like to mention, I know a lot of people are Google users. Not everybody. I know some schools are Microsoft, but if you are a Google Workspace school, what's nice about Bard is that you can specifically ask it to find things for you from your Google Apps, from your docs, from your slides, from your sheets, from your email. So sometimes, like I know in the years that I was in the classroom, I accumulated a lot of resources. And even though it was organized, I couldn't find things I was looking for. With Bard, you can actually go through and say, find me all of my resources about this. And you might find, graphic organizers or strategies or things you created for students in past years that you totally forgot existed. Just like a, little plug. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. You can also use Google Bard and ChatGPT to make you ideas for choice boards for assessments. Again, I'm very big on making the actual artifact of the choice board myself because I want it to look a certain way. You could go into a platform that does it for you, but I just like to look for ideas. So you could ask for project ideas for an end of unit assessment on a specific skill. What are some ideas that students could do? I think on this one, I plugged an argument essay because I always like to find authentic and different ways for students to show their argument writing skills. And it gives me a project idea and a potential description. And I might go through again and say, you know what? I only like one of these. I didn't think about writing a community action plan, but that is an argument. Okay, you know what? I'll throw it out there for my students. Let me break it down and write it in my own language. It's a great way to get new ideas, especially when you're trying to offer up choice for your students in end of unit or end of lesson assessments. It's a great way to, just get some new ideas to add to your strategies. Same thing here. And what's nice is if you ask for ideas, both Bard and ChatGPT will put it in a table for you too. This one actually shows you, what skills are involved and things like that. Again, I wouldn't just take all of this and dump it on a choice board. But for me, I'm going to look at it as the teacher and say, okay, you know what? I have these 3 ones that I made myself, and I thought about some ways that students could express what they've learned. I'm going to add this one, and this one. And I'm going to go to ChatGPT and use this one. And then I made a choice board, and not a 3x3 board with some options on it. Just again, to get some ideas, to get some inspiration to offer up to students to say, here are some choices to demonstrate what you've learned. I really also like the idea of giving options for building background knowledge. And obviously, you could just do a Google search and pull different resources on a topic. So in this example, I had to have my students figure out what a tardigrade water bear was, because if they didn't understand what that was, they wouldn't understand the extended metaphor from the piece we were reading. So I gave them a list of resources and said, here are some resources, explore about this topic and come back and present, one thing you learned so we can expand our background knowledge before you read the text. So what I asked for in ChatGPT and Bard was a variety of mediums of resources. And then I gave parentheses. I said, like, give me podcasts, give me videos, give me infographics, give me other resources. And then I asked it for in a table format because I like things to look nice. And then what I did as the teacher, I went through and I looked at these resources and said, okay, like I'm immediately going to eliminate TPT. I don't want teachers pay teachers on there. But BBC Earth, okay, that is a legitimate source. Like TED Ed, great, awesome. National Geographic, that's great. Okay, I don't know science versus podcast, but I'm going to listen to it, make sure it's okay before I give it to my students as a resource for exploration. And it just kind of gives you an opportunity to help them build their background knowledge and pick the medium they want to learn from too, which is great. This is the same one, but this is that was ChatGPT. This is Bard. Bard actually includes the links, but same thing. I went through and I said, okay, I know TED Ed is suitable. I know that BBC is suitable. Okay. And then the other ones that I don't know, I'm going to go back and verify and make sure that they're accurate and okay. But this was the prompt that I used to help get that to that point. I think this is one of my last strategies. You can also use ChatGPT and Bard to help organize graphic organizers. Sometimes I'm like looking for an idea for how to organize a graphic organizer for my students. And I'm like, oh, the one I have is not working. What are some other ways that I could create a graphic organizer to help them? Bard and ChatGPT can do that for you. It's great for if you have a graphic organizer for something and you want to have maybe more or less supports for a student based on their individual needs. So here's an example from ChatGPT. They kind of built one out. They actually give you the code for it too, which is pretty cool. But maybe you look at it and say, oh, you know what? I didn't think to structure that way. But that really would help my students in figuring out, this skill or practicing this skill. Again, just another way for you to see potential ideas for better supporting your students. Oh, I did not have another one. You could create a presentation outline through ChatGPT and Google Bard as well. I always throw that in there because some people have asked me about that in the past and they were interested, how can I create some of these learning resources? You can always, go to ChatGPT and Bard to get some information from there as well. And then you can use a graphic design tool to actually go in and create the tool based on the information that you find. Okay. All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the practice questions because we kind of did cover that. But you can use ChatGPT and Bard to come up with math, science questions based on individual interests as well. So in this case, I asked for, I had students interested in social media. We're doing this skill in math. Write me some word problems that involve social media because I don't feel like thinking of ones on the fly myself. So they write some questions for you. Obviously, they don't give you the answer, but you could look at it from a math teacher perspective and say, okay, yeah, that is how I would format a question on, this skill. And maybe I'll change the numbers around, but it kind of gives you a template to work with, which can engage your students more, especially if that's something they're interested in. Okay, so I do want to cover a couple of reminders before we finish up for the evening. But like I said, use the information or ideas that you find from ChatGPT and Bard and from these prompts as inspiration. I don't personally go in. I know you can do it, and I know people do. Like I said, I'm particular about how things look. So for me, I look at information from ChatGPT, Bard, another resource, and it's a way for me to accumulate ideas. Maybe I see something I hadn't thought of, and it sparks something in my head, and I'm like, oh, this would be a great idea. Let me build on that. Again, avoid using student information and data when doing search inquiries. I try not to. I just keep it general. How to connect these skills for a student interested in this. Keeping it very general. No student names, no student information. Double check to make sure all information, resources, and links are accurate before sharing with students if you are doing any of those text-based ones. And then get to know your students is always an important one. I probably should have said that at the beginning. But a lot of these strategies incorporate using their interests and things that they like. So use interests, surveys, inventories, interviews to really get a sense of what your students are interested in so you can tailor your search queries and ideas accordingly. And also check them frequently during the year. I taught middle school, and at the beginning of the year, we'd do interviews talking about their interests, and then 3 months later, they would change. So I used to do them frequently just to kind of get a sense of what my students were interested in when I was designing things. And then use the tools to generate resources that provide really options and flexibility. That's really what you're trying to do, using AI to make sure that students are getting the supports that they need during the learning process. Okay, so that's everything I have. I wanted to open it up with the last couple of minutes and see if anybody had any questions. And I always like to say any questions or any ideas, because especially with technology, you might have an idea or something you've tried that has been really great that you want to share. So questions or ideas for me. And if not, that's great too.
Looks like you were able to manage the chat and get all the questions that were addressed there.
Oh, good. Always have to make sure I didn't miss any. There were some good ideas going in the chat too. There were a couple of suggestions I saw that were great.
I just, I sort of always like to have a roadmap. So what do you think is the direction this is going to take? Where do you think it's going?
For me personally, I think I would see this going as teachers getting new ideas for ways they can support their students. I think whenever I do presentations, especially on, supporting learners in the classroom, the question is always, well, what supports do I give? Where are these ideas coming from? Where do I find the time to do all this? So for me, I see this as finding new ways to make learning accessible for the different needs of your students, if that makes sense. It's like a good branching off point. Like if you're not sure how to reach them, it could give you an idea for how to, continue to support them in the classroom.
Do you discuss, or have you reached out to any of the vendors to see where they might be going with this technology?
Within like ChatGPT, Bard, not personally. I do try to keep track of all the AI tools that have come out, and there's so many. There's an overwhelming amount. I feel like there's like one new one or multiple new ones every day that I have to check out. I have talked to a couple of just platforms to see where they were going, but I mean, in terms of like the larger scale ones, I have not reached out to them personally.
It looks like we have a
Thank
raised
you.
hand.
Oh yeah, I see hand raised.
Hi there. Just real quick, folks. Hi, I'm Bobby Baggio. I'm looking for some volunteers to sit on something called the Technology Review Committee. This is out of the Silicon Valley. Doug, I already put you on there. Rod, I put your name on there too. They review new startup companies, and right now they're dealing with a couple that are L&D and L&D content oriented. Everything uses AI these days, so it's all using AI. If you're interested, email me at Baggio, Baggio. Give me your information, and I'd be happy to put you on the list. It takes an hour worth of your time, and it's usually fun. So.
So were there any other questions or ideas? I love that part.
People always teach me new things. Got to include it.
So if that's it, I just want to say thank you, Katie, for this presentation tonight, and thank everybody for attending. I'm sorry about some of the confusion at the beginning of the evening, but rest assured this has been recorded, and I will share the recording. It will be posted on our website, on our YouTube channel, I mean, and also I'll send you the link to it as well. Before we end, I would like to also again recognize our sponsors, Learnix, which can be found at learnix.com, learnics.com, and Rod's Pulse Podcast, which can be found at rodspulsepodcast.com. And before we go, I'd like to let you know that there's going to be another webinar coming up on January 9th, titled The Importance of Computer Science Education. Please feel free to go to our website, NEDLA.org, and sign up. So thank you so much, and good night.